Good morning. I am Councillor Nikki Brennan and I will be chairing this hearing of Subcommittee C of the Licensing and Public Protection Committee of Birmingham City Council. Before we start, can you all please mute your microphones for the moment in order to improve the sound quality whilst I outline the procedure? Can you also please turn off your cameras with the exception of committee members unless you are the person speaking? This is to reduce bandwidth. Committee members will have their cameras on throughout the hearing. Could everyone attending today's meeting please put their mobile phone onto silent and ensure that they are situated in a room or environment which is free from distractions or unnecessary noise from TVs, radios, etc. Thank you for that. I am speaking slowly and clearly so everyone can follow. It is vitally important, for what I hope are obvious reasons, that those attending the meeting and making representations are able to hear me and my members of my subcommittee and officers. Any distractions brought to my attention could result in the meeting being suspended temporarily or to another date or time under regulations for these type of meetings. I also confirm that this is a public meeting and is therefore being live streamed on the City Council's website in order that the general public can view it. Members are reminded that they must declare all relevant pecuniary and non-pecuniary interests arising from any business to be discussed at this meeting. If a disclosure of all pecuniary interest is declared, a member must not speak or take part in that agenda item. Any declarations will be recorded in the minutes of the meeting. Apologies were submitted on behalf of Councillor Locke and Councillor Donaldson was the nominated substitute member. Can I welcome you to this hearing for an application in respect of Dolce Desserts, 413 Hagley Road West, Quinton, Birmingham, B32 2AD. I'll begin with some introductions. As stated previously, I am Councillor Nikki Brennan and I am chairing this meeting of the Licensing Subcommittee. With me are other members of the subcommittee, Councillor Mike Ward.
Hello.
And Councillor Diane Donaldson.
Morning, Chair.
Also present in the meeting are the following officers. Licensing Officer Shaya Jessa.
Good morning, Chair.
Committee Manager Katie Townshend.
Good morning, Chair.
Committee Lawyer Joanne Swampillai.
Good morning, Chair.
Could I ask all parties to identify themselves, please? Firstly, the applicant.
Good morning, Chair, and Merry Christmas to everybody. I'm here to represent the applicant, Camilla, who is, I'll just turn the camera around, and a business partner, Fazan, is also here.
Oh, yeah.
So we're all together in the room.
Thank you very much. And next, those making representations. So environmental health.
Good morning, Chair. My name is Peter Brown. I'm an environmental health officer and we made a representation regarding this application.
Thank you very much. Could I ask if any persons making representations wishes to withdraw their representations at this stage of the hearing? Oh, I will assume that all parties have read and understood the Licensing Committee procedural rules which were sent out with the notice of today's hearing. Please note that given the nature of today's proceedings, I may at my discretion amend the procedural rules to reflect the fact that this meeting is taking place online, but wish to assure you all that any such amendments will not impact on the parties' right to a fair hearing. We will be using the chat function in Microsoft Teams to communicate. One of the icons on your toolbar is a speech bubble. Click the speech bubble to go on to chat. If you do not have access to chat function for any reason, please use the raise a hand function to indicate you wish to speak. That button is usually 4 from the right on the toolbar. You can also, of course, indicate verbally that you wish to speak at the appropriate time. Can you all now confirm that you have access to the chat by typing your own name now, and officers will also type their job title. And this meeting will not proceed until all have done so.
That's everyone, Chair.
Thank you. Please keep the chat column open for the entire duration of the meeting in order that everyone can follow the messages being posted in the chat. With the exception of subcommittee members, please keep your camera off unless you are the person speaking. If there are any problems with bandwidth which cause difficulties with the sound, I may, in my discretion, ask everyone to turn their cameras off in order that the meeting can proceed with everyone being able to hear and be heard. Does anyone wish to make any preliminary points at this stage? If so, please indicate that you wish to raise a point by typing speak in the chat function or using a raise your hand function now. Thank you. I will now briefly outline the procedure we will be following today. Firstly, the licensing officer will present the report. Then the applicant and their representative will be asked to present their case, and we are asking if this could be kept to approximately 20 minutes. Then those making representations will be invited to make their case. Again, approximately 20 minutes will be allowed for this part of the hearing. Can I ask that all parties speak as slowly and clearly as they possibly can, because the officers are taking notes by hand for minutes, and the meeting is also being live streamed on the City Council's website. If at any point it is someone else's turn to speak, please mute your microphone and use the chat function to communicate if necessary. Please note that members of the subcommittee will be able to ask questions at any stage, but will try to do so at the conclusion of each presentation. Cross-examination by the applicant and those making representations will not be permitted unless the members consider it appropriate. Where questions are raised by members of the subcommittee or those present, please signify this using the chat facility set out on the right-hand side of the screen you are viewing this meeting on. The meeting manager will alert me if I do not notice messages in the chat. I will determine verbally or in writing on the chat facility the order in which questions are dealt with. Additionally, you may also wish to seek a notify a question or point verbally in the usual way at the appropriate time. At any point in the meeting, if you wish to speak, please type the word speak into the chat function and the meeting manager will ensure that we come to you at the appropriate point. If at any point you cannot hear or are having problems with your internet connection, please use the chat facility to alert the meeting manager. The chair will then ask the person speaking to repeat what they just said. It is therefore important that you use the chat function as soon as you are unable to hear the person speaking. It may well be that the problem is caused by people still using their microphones or cameras, which creates interference. So I remind everyone to please mute their microphones and turn off their cameras when you are not the person speaking. Could I also point out that occasionally it may be necessary for the subcommittee to take legal advice. At my discretion, I may ask all parties to wait in this meeting whilst members and the relevant officers withdraw to take legal advice using a separate meeting within Microsoft Teams. We will then return to the meeting and continue. Please note that if any time the live stream being broadcast on the City Council's website fails, I will ask you all to mute your microphones and cameras and to stop speaking until the live stream is restored. If at any point this meeting goes into private session, the meeting manager will pause the live stream. Once the private part of the meeting is over, I will ask the meeting manager to confirm that the live stream has resumed before we continue. At the conclusion of the hearing, I will invite all parties to make a brief closing submission. Can I stress that no decision will be taken until all the evidence has been heard? At the decision-making stage, the members and the relevant officers will withdraw from the meeting in order to determine the decision. They will go into a separate Microsoft Teams meeting. In the event that the members need to clarify any point, you will be telephoned by the meeting manager. The members will then make a decision. Notification of the determination of the application will be sent out to all parties within 5 working days. So I hope that is reasonably straightforward. And with that, can I ask the licensing officer to present the report, please?
Thank you, Chair. DD Quinton Limited applied on the 5th of November 2021 for the grant of a premises licence for Dulce Desserts, 413 Hagley Road West, Quinton, Birmingham, B32 2AD. Councillors, the purpose of the report before you today is to consider a representation that has been made in respect of an application for a premises licence, which initially sought to permit the provision of late night refreshment to operate indoors only from 11 p.m. until 2:30 a.m. Monday to Sunday. Now, after discussions with West Midlands Police, the applicant has agreed to amend the scope of the application with licensable activities to cease at 1:30 a.m. Monday to Sunday. The premises wish to remain open to the public from 12 midday until 1:30 a.m. Monday to Sunday, with deliveries to cease at 2:30 a.m. A representation has been received from Environmental Health as a responsible authority, and it's attached to Appendix 1 of your report. The application is attached to Appendix 2. As I've previously said, conditions have been agreed with West Midlands Police and the applicant, and these are attached to Appendix 3 of your report. There's also some site location plans at Appendix 4. Now, when carrying out its licensing function, a licensing authority must have regard to Birmingham City Council Statement of Licensing Policy and the guidance issued by the Secretary of State under Section 182 of the Licensing Act 2003. The licensing authority is also required to take such steps as it considers appropriate for the promotion of the licensing objectives. The options which are available to you today are to grant the license in accordance with the application, to reject the application, to grant the license subject to conditions modified to such an extent as considered appropriate, exclude from the license any of the licensable activities to which the application relates. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Craig, would you like to make your case on behalf of the applicant?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So I visited the premises last Friday. They are situated on Hagley Road West, which I'm sure everybody here will know is a busy road. And actually, I'm going to do things a little bit in reverse, actually, because with good reason. You've seen this. Hopefully, everybody's seen the supporting documents that I sent in, including the menu for the premises. So Camilla, who sits with me, and Fazana actually have, this will be their fourth such premises, to be fair. They've got one on Corporation Street, very near my chambers, which I've walked past on a number of occasions. They've got one in Selly Oak, one in Sutton, and they've also got a dark kitchen in Nechells, which is why I'm distinguishing that from the other premises, because that's not doesn't provide retail to members of the public going in. And three of those, in fact, are licensed for the provision of late night refreshment. And as you can see from the menu, and perhaps the Dolce desserts, the clue is in the name to some extent. It's a business that sells, as you can see, desserts and beverages. And that's it. Nothing of any savoury nature as such is served. Now, the reason that's I would submit highly relevant to this application is for this reason. When the Licensing Act was devised in and around the early part of this century, and it was enacted in 2003 and obviously brought into force, as I'm sure everybody knows, in November 2005. There was a decision made at government level to regulate the sale of hot food after 11 o'clock at night. Alcohol, the provision of late night food had previously been regulated, but not within the context of licensing. And the decision was made to do that for a particular reason, very with good reason, is right to say. And speaking, using, I suppose, a little street vernacular, it was basically because people would go into a kebab shop after the pub shut out, and they were scrapping in a kebab shop, and they were hot points for violence and disorder. And so the regulators and the legislators said, look, we need to regulate this. We need to have a means of controlling these types of establishment in order that we can regulate it and monitor it and make it subject to enforcement action, but also that we can take that activity away so that anyone serving hot food after that time or can be subject to an appropriate sanction. And of course, what they couldn't do was bring in an Act of Parliament that said, OK, anyone who's got a kebab shop is therefore going to be subject to this legislation. It just wouldn't have been in any way enforceable or workable or, quite frankly, fair, because someone would have just described their premises in other ways. And so the only way they could sensibly and fairly and deal with that in a way that was enforceable was to say any hot food after 11 o'clock. Which is why, for example, and I know as a licensing authority, you've dealt with a number of applications at committee level from McDonald's, for example, which I would also argue is distinguishable from these premises. But it's right to say that those types of premises where people are going to the pub, spilling out afterwards, have got a desire for hot, savoury food, because frankly they've been drinking all night, and therefore a load of people are descending on a kebab shop, for example, or even a McDonald's actually at a particular time of night, are entirely distinguishable from these premises. And so within the range of premises that offer late night refreshment, I suppose you could call a kebab shop a nightclub, and you could describe this as a cafe or a restaurant within the scope of where premises are authorised to sell alcohol. And so that's the first point that I'm going to make, is that this premises, because they are selling waffles and pancakes and crepes and also serving coffees, for example, are required to be licensed under the Licensing Act. But it simply is fanciful, to say the least. It does not bear any logical scrutiny to say that the potential for crime, disorder and nuisance is going to be anything like the same in this types of premises as they would be, for example, in a kebab shop or a curry house, for example, that doesn't have a license to sell alcohol. It just simply experience, I would hope, would and logic would point everybody in that direction. And in actual fact, I haven't taken instructions on this, but these premises would be quite legitimately permitted to, at a particular point in time, cease selling hot food and then just move on to selling cookie dough and ice cream and sundaes and milkshakes, and there would be nothing unlawful about that. And that would be frankly a bizarre state of affairs where a premises wasn't authorised to sell pancakes, for example, or could sell pancakes if they were cold, but couldn't sell them if they were hot. So I make that point now. I also make the point, I have been in dialogue with environmental health, and they're perfectly entitled to maintain their representation into this application, and they've been consistent in so doing. And obviously, it's a matter for you to determine. But I'll just make a couple of points in respect of the other premises in the area that they've made reference to. I firstly point to the fact that they've talked about the restaurant that's the any restaurant that's up the road that's licensed until 2 a.m. And then there's reference made to the fact that, well, they don't always operate till that time. Well, that's not a consideration, because frankly, anybody could take that premises over and lawfully operate it till 2 a.m. or they could decide to operate it till 2 a.m. The fact is that that premises is licensed till 2 a.m. For late night refreshment, and so accordingly, they will, if you are minded to grant this application as it now stands, you have a licensed premise in the area that would be licensed for longer than this. And I also make the point about that premises, which is the fact that I looked at on your licensing register. And it was licensed in 2006, and there've been no reviews against that a license. And so it's Shaplarani. I was just struggling around with papers to find the name for it, Chapelarani. There've been no issues at that premises, and I'm sure if there had been, given the fact the representation is from environmental health, if they were aware of any nuisance issues at that premises, then they would have made you aware of that. And so you have a premise that is licensed for longer, basically on the same strip. What is it, about 4 doors down, 3 doors down? Oh, it's 1 door away. Forgive me. Okay, there you go. So is it next door but one? Next door but one. Next door but one. So it's next door but one. I was a bit thrown actually, because I used to drive on that road a lot. My son, when I lived in the jury course, my son was at Old Swinford Hospital in Stourbridge, and so I used to drive to see him every Sunday on that road, and it's a road I know well. And I remember remarking to myself, I'm sure there's a McDonald's up the road. And I looked on your register and I checked on your register and I couldn't find it. And every day is a school day. In actual fact, there is a McDonald's, which is about 1/3 of a mile away. It's just up the road. It's probably 5 minutes walk up the road. And it's a 24-hour McDonald's. And reason that I couldn't find it on your register, and I just simply didn't know this, if you drive up the Hagley Road into town and take a left at Wolverhampton Road, as soon as you turn on there, you're in Sandwell Council. I've checked on your map this morning. That is Sandwell Council. So even though it's sort of on the Hagley Road, because it's slightly set back, it's actually technically Oldbury. It's on the Wolverhampton Road, and therefore it is licensed by another authority. But I checked online today. So you actually have a 24-hour McDonald's just up the road. And I make the point in respect to that, it is a busy road. You know, I've driven that road at various times of night. I've driven it at 2 in the morning, 4 in the morning. There are always cars. It's a busy road. Okay, so I also make that point. I make the further point in terms of environmental health has said it's a residential area. Well, there haven't been any representations from local residents, and I know that they made specific reference to a residential a property upstairs. Well, that is simply not going to be the case, because my clients own the building outright, and so from that point of view, sorry, we don't own it. You've leased it. Well, okay, they've leased the building. Forgive me, they don't own it. They leased the building. They've got a right to occupy both floors, and there's no intention whatsoever of that being a residential space as things stand. So from that point of view, any concerns about upstairs are addressed by that particular fact. I just talk about my clients are obviously experienced business people in this city. They employ, how many people do you employ overall? About 50 people are employed in this city by them. No suggestion that they aren't suitable people to hold a license. There's no suggestion that they run their business in anything other than a lawful fashion. I know there was recently a routine check by officers, one of their premises, one of their other premises, which came up absolutely spot on. So from that point of view, you have people here who are law abiding and run their business properly. Obviously, I just make the broad point that you'll be dealing with each case on its own merits, and that the representations from environmental health are frankly speculative. That there's nothing to support what they're saying in any meaningful way, and I just make the point as well that this has been a terrible time for lots of businesses in the last couple of years. This is still a permissive regime. This is not an accumulative impact area. You have no representations from any local residents. You have nothing to suggest that there's a prevailing issue around nuisance in the area. All environmental health are saying to you is, well, midnight's okay, but we think 1:30 is a bit much because we think there's a potential for a bit of nuisance if it's granted. Well, frankly, that's not enough. You've got to base any determination you make to refuse this, I would respectfully submit, on something more substantial than that. This is a modest application given the scope of the operation, given the type of food that's on offer. They've engaged with West Midlands Police. West Midlands Police are perfectly happy that the licensable activities cease at 1:30. Really, it's a matter for you members to determine whether you think midnight or 1:30 is appropriate. But for all the reasons I've outlined, the McDonald's up the road that's 24-hour, the fact it's a busy road, there's no reps at all from local residents, the style of operation, the type of food that's on offer, the extra conditions that I've offered, and forgive me, I nearly missed that. Just ask you to turn to those. As ever, what I've endeavoured to do is tailor any conditions offered at this stage based on the representations of whoever's made them. And obviously the only rep you have, now that West Midlands Police are out the way, is from environmental health. So perhaps unusual, but I have applied this to various premises lately. I think that the principal concern is going to be people potentially outside. In fact, you know what? Thinking about it, I'm going to invite you, if you do grant it, to insert the words after people inside and immediately outside the premises at all times. Forgive me. I think that's sensible, actually. What I've done is I've lifted that from a condition that I sometimes apply to off licenses where there's a danger of street drinkers, for example. I think that's right. It's got to be right. It can't be right that you've got a requirement to deal with people who are outside, but not the people who are inside. So that dispersal policy obviously has to be in place at the time licensable activities commence. I will help them draft that once they've got the business model formalised. Standard one around notices to respect local residents, waste products to be stored in suitable containers, no exterior lights to cause annoyance to any nearby residential property, and then no deliveries or refuse collection from the premises between the hours of 7 p.m. and 7 a.m. I just add as well, Chapel Aran, I looked at they've only got one public nuisance condition, which bizarrely, and this goes back to 2006, says deliveries can only be between 4:45 and 5:30 in the afternoon, which I just think is a bit nuts, to be honest. But look, that's on there. They're obviously working with that. But I just make the point that I think between 7 p.m. and 7 a.m. is sensible. Premises need to have a degree of flexibility, but I think those hours are fair to both. They're a balancing exercise between the premises and local residents. And so, for all those reasons, I would invite you to grant the application as it stands. I don't know how I've done. I think I might be under my 20 minutes this time, Chair.
Yeah, 1 minute under.
There you go. There you go. I'm getting a bit of practice at it. That's what it is.
Yeah, you are. Does anybody else want to make any representations from your party?
Want to say anything briefly, Camilla? No. They obviously. Oh, thank you. Well, there we go. They're satisfied with what I've had to say.
Thank you. Councillor Donaldson, do you have any questions?
No questions, Chair.
Councillor Ward, do you have any questions?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Chair. Two questions for you, Duncan.
Yes.
First of all, 413 Hagley Road West used to be a bank. Banks obviously have very different hours to dessert restaurants.
I think that's a comment.
Never likely to stay open till 1:30 a.m. Thank goodness. Has your client checked whether they have consent for use of these premises as anything other than a bank? And I'm talking here about planning consent.
My client's nodding. I think in actual fact, I think within I think it's within it's not in the papers, but I know that Environmental Health have commented that there aren't any restrictions on the premises in terms of hours from a planning point of view, which would suggest that they do have the necessary planning for that particular use. I mean, planning and licensing are different regimes. I often find myself repeating this, and it's not a consideration with respect in relation to today's. But look, my client are I mean, you think you've got the use category? Yeah. So they've taken the lease on. The landlord has said that there is the correct use category. And so if that's not the case, I think there'd be a case of misrepresentation. So I've answered it as thoroughly as I can. I've not asked the question of them because, frankly, because of what I've said, I didn't ask the question of them. So I've had to respond to that now. But my understanding is they've got the correct use category. It may be the environmental health may be able to cast some more light on that than I can.
Okay, Chair, should we ask environmental health at this point, or should we ask them when they make their representations?
I'll wait for them to make their representations.
Sure. Okay, no problem. The other question, Duncan, is it not the case that I mean, you've eloquently pointed out that the Indian restaurant 2 doors away, if it wanted to, could stay open until 2 o'clock in the morning, and the fact that it doesn't is irrelevant. Is it not also the case that that if your client wanted to, then they could let out the premises above the shop as residential accommodation? You know, the fact that they haven't or don't at this stage intend to, is that relevant at all?
Well, it's relevant because we're dealing with the application as it stands today. They're saying to me, why can't... It's our office upstairs. Okay. It's their office upstairs. So they will be using it as an office. I suppose the truth is, yes, there would be nothing preventing them doing that in a year's time or 2 years' time. But if you're using, when you say your office, you're going to use your head office. Oh, head office, going to be the head office. So the head office is being located there. So unlikely, based on the application as it stands and for the foreseeable, I would say. And I would respectfully submit we can only deal with the foreseeable within the context of today.
Okay, thank you, Duncan. Thank you, Chair. No further questions.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you. I've got one question. And my question is, you've mentioned that the applicant has other premises across Birmingham.
Yes.
How long have those premises been operating with them in charge?
Shall I turn the camera around? You're going to be all right with that? No, she doesn't want the camera on her.
City Centre's 8 years.
City Centre, so Corporation Street's 8 years.
Yeah. Selly Oak's 3.5.
Selly Oak's 3.5.
Sutton Coldfield's 1.5.
Sutton Coldfield's 1.5. And the dark kitchen?
About 7 months.
7 months, the dark kitchen.
Okay, that's all my questions.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We will now move on to representations from environmental health.
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, panel. This application is broadly supported by environmental health. Our only sticking point is the hours. The area generally is a residential area, even though it's on a main road. There is a lot of residential accommodation, including above the row of shops that this occupied in that row. And after discussion with other officers in the environmental protection team and with my manager, we agreed that 1:30, well, initially it was 4:30, and that was subsequently modified to 1:30 on the advice of the police, I believe. It's more residential than it is business. The typical businesses in that row, other than the restaurants or the small number of food premises that stay open until I think the latest is midnight at weekends currently. Their offices, hairdressers, nail bars, the sort of thing that you might expect to find in a residential area. It's not an area that we would consider to be typically part of the nighttime economy. There are other suitable locations. Reference was made to McDonald's down the road. The location for the McDonald's there is much more suitable for a 24-hour premises, and had that been next to residential accommodation, we would probably object. Well, it's not in our area, but we would typically object to premises, to food premises being in a closely residential area. We believe in environmental health that the where the area is not part of the nighttime economy, that hours should be restricted to protect the amenity of the residents. And I don't mean the amenity of the residents from the effects of antisocial noise, but even just normal operating noise. I'm not suggesting that the patrons of Dolce Desserts are going to be having street fights and shouting out in the street at 1 o'clock in the morning. I think it's the normal noise of people arriving, doors shutting, the vehicles turning up, the normal hubbub of business will affect residents, not just above the shop, but either side. There is residential, close residential to the shop, and that is the problem that environmental health have with it. I think that's it, really. I mean, I hoped to keep it brief, and I think I have done. I think that we had another recent licensing application for Dolce Desserts in the town, in the centre of Birmingham, to which there was no objection because the location was more suitable. I may have got that wrong. It was certainly another dessert shop, but it's just the hours that we have a problem with here, and we've made our representation, and if the panel sees fit not to take that same approach, then we're happy to live with it.
Thank you very much. Councillor Ward, do you want to make your point of clarification?
Yes, it was suggested by Duncan, Peter, that you may know whether there is current planning consent for the use of these premises as a restaurant. Can you shed any light on that or not?
Well, I don't think it's an hours restriction. I looked up to see if there was an hours restriction, but the planning regime's changed recently, and it, rather than having multiple categories, a lot of categories such as non-food premises, retail, and food premises and so on have been put into the same category to simplify the planning procedure. So it may be, even if it was a bank once upon a time, which it was, there is no requirement to have a change of use on the premises. They might need a planning application if they were going to install external ventilation equipment, for instance, but just for the use, it may not need a planning application. I'm no planning expert. I don't know whether that's the case or not, but I do know there's no hours restriction on the building.
Okay, I acknowledge that it's not something that you would necessarily investigate, but thank you for that, Peter. I have no further questions, but thank you for thinking of the local residents. We do look to the environmental health officers to protect residents where necessary, and I appreciate that that's the spirit in which you're attending today.
Thank you.
Councillor Donaldson, do you have any questions?
No questions, Chair.
I have no questions for you, Peter. So would you like to make a closing submission?
No, really, just to reiterate what I said. I mean, the environmental health would be thoroughly supportive of this business were the hours a little bit reduced. All we're trying to do is to protect the amenity of local residents, and it's not part of the nighttime economy there, and it's probably worth making the point that if the more premises that are given late night refreshment licenses or extended hours, it would encourage others to do it, and eventually the hours creep forwards and forwards, and then, who knows where it stopped. I've seen it happen in other places where one premises gets a 2 o'clock license and someone else says, oh, we'll have one of those as well. And eventually you've got 6 premises with 2 o'clock licenses, and it becomes a magnet for people to turn up until 2 o'clock in the morning. And the amenity of the area, if you like, is gradually adversely affected. I'm not saying that will happen in this case, but it is a risk. And that's what we want to try and avoid.
Thank you. Duncan, would you like to make a closing submission?
Sorry, I was caught a bit on the hop then. This has been shorter than normal, and everyone will be delighted to hear. I'm going to be shorter than normal. I just make the point in respect of what Peter said. I mean, look, the client has scaled back. They've taken on board the representations of West Midlands Police. It originally was 2:30. It's now 1:30, subject to deliveries to 2:30. But we're dealing with licensable activities today. And I just make the point, you know, if it was a concern for local residents, the application was advertised, we'd have had some reps from them, and there's no evidence from environmental health that any concerns have been raised by local residents. I understand they've got a job to do. I'm not being critical of them. I hope everyone thinks I'm never critical of responsible authorities. I know what a job they've got to do, and you know, you've got to make a decision, balancing exercise between what's being said today. We're not dealing with any other potential applications in the future. That is pure speculation. This is a busy road. There are residential properties, but I mean, and there are lots of McDonald's that have 24-hour licenses that have residential properties around them. It's not quite as perhaps as these things aren't ever totally black and white, but these are premises, the style of operation that are low impact. That they aren't. This isn't a high risk application. It's not like I said, a kebab shop. This is a premises that needs, in order to comply with its lawful obligations, needs to have a license in order to be able to serve pancakes and crepes and waffles beyond 11 o'clock at night. They're asking for 1:30. It isn't ridiculously late, and so for all those reasons, I would respectfully invite you to grant the application as it now stands.
Thank you. I will now ask all parties to leave the Microsoft Teams meeting, and the members, the committee lawyer and the committee manager will go into the private session while the subcommittee makes its decision. You'll be notified of the decision of the subcommittee within 5 working days. So thank you for your time this morning, and I hope everybody has a lovely Christmas and a happy New Year.
Yes, and can I just thank all your officers for all their assistance that they've provided to me this year, and likewise I wish everybody a Merry Christmas.